Welcome, everybody, to the Alchemy Lab with me, Colm Holland. And the Alchemy Lab is where each week I get to speak to some amazing people who mostly are very busy harnessing unconditional love in their lives to transform their life and also to transform the world around them. If this is your first time tuning into the lab, then you may want to check out my website, which is colmholland.com, where you can find out all about my new book, which is being released at the end of the month, called The Secret of the Alchemist, in which I uncover the secret in Paulo Coelho's best-selling novel, The Alchemist, together with my personal story of a life full of magic, ever since I published his book and met him back in Australia in 1993. But I also talk a lot about how you too can create miracles in your life by following the ancient spiritual wisdom of the alchemists. Now, today I'm particularly excited, today's edition of the Alchemy Lab, because my special guest and I have only actually met fairly recently, but we suddenly, instantly discovered a soulful connection through an amazing set of events of synchronicity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm thrilled to welcome the famous Geoff Thompson. Hi, Geoff. How are you?
Hi. Good, Colm. Thank you for having me on this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm calling you famous. I hope that's not going to embarrass you, but
a legend in my own lunchbox.
A legend in your own lunchtime. Yeah. Well, and my lunchtime as well. So that extends it even further. So, just quickly, for those of you who've never met Geoff, not heard of Geoff before, Geoff is a BAFTA-winning writer. He's had many lives as a filmmaker, as a teacher, as a self-defense instructor, as well as some other former lives, which I'm sure he'll tell us about as well. He has written several books, best-selling books, on self-help, self-defense, martial arts, and written many screenplays for short and feature films. And I'm hoping, Geoff, during this episode and the next two, and we'll talk about the fact that this is a series in just a moment. For those of you that are listening in on your podcast channel, and for those viewers on YouTube, this is going to be one of a series of 3, that's our aim, podcasts, which are loosely titled, thanks to Geoff for this title, 2 Ordinary Boys Living 2 Extraordinary Lives. And hopefully the meaning of that phrase will become apparent, Geoff, as we have this conversation. I think that the motive and the reason we're doing this little series is that you and I have both discovered that an extraordinary life is actually for everyone in a real world, that actually there is no divide between the divine and the ordinary, between the mundane and the holy, and that in some ways, one of the things that you and I have both managed to achieve through the help with from unconditional love is that we've been able to make the mundane divine and vice versa. In the alchemist terms, we have learned to take the lead of our lives and turn that into gold. The alchemists have a favorite phrase, which is that which is below is like that which is above, which is in the Emerald Tablet. And in your book, which I want to start off talking about your book first, The Divine CEO, Creating a Divine Covenant. And you said to me last week that it's a divine covenant with miraculous everyday outcomes. So, Geoff, we have a lot in common. Let's kick off, both in terms of our origins, apparently, and also our current work. Tell me a little bit about yourself and maybe a bit about your new book, The Divine CEO.
Well, as we said, I'm an ordinary bloke and I live an extraordinary life. So I'm an extraordinary bloke, but only in the sense that everybody is extraordinary. I was just very, very curious, or as Guy Ritchie said, a troublemaker. He called me a troublemaker because I wasn't taking yes for an answer. I didn't want to just turn up for work and clock in and clock out and live a menial life, not contented with the factory job where I'm sweeping a floor and, the tiny house and, the old car and the marriage that wasn't just wasn't kind of fulfilling something. Just this sense that I wasn't living an authentic life, but looking at it and thinking, well, this is how everybody is. This must be how it is. And of course, the investigation into that, which I was always investigating ever since I was a kid, really led me into depression because I just couldn't find a way out. I later realized that the depression was a calling. They say the fall is the call, or I say the fall is the call. Put it on a t-shirt. Remember where it came from. So I ended up getting into lots of depressions because I had this thirst to live, to really experience the full potential of my life, but I wasn't able to do it. I didn't even have enough information or education to know how to earn more money. I didn't really understand why other people earned more than me. I didn't understand how to earn more money other than to do 2 or 3 jobs, which I often did. I just didn't have that width of consciousness to understand it. The depression came as they do. They come in, they sweep through your life, they rape and they pillage, and they just say, my name is depression, see you again soon. And they would go and come back. They would leave when they wanted to and come back when they wanted to. And I felt
age,
invaded by that.
What age are we talking about? So just to put this into context of your lifespan.
I was suffering with depression from, I would say, from the first time I went to big school. When I was in the small school, I was a god. Everybody knew I was a god. I was the goalkeeper for the football team, and the girls liked me, and I was somebody. When I went to the big school, I was a small fish in a huge pond.
So about 11, 12 years old. When
I first started to experience it, yeah.
And where were you? Because this is a bit of the synchronicity. I think we should put a stake in the ground. Okay, so where were you born and where did you go to school?
I was born in Tile Hill in Coventry. We ended up living in Walsgrave. I went to a school called Cardinal Wiseman Comprehensive. I think you went to Caledon.
Well, this is the
synchronicity. From us.
So 7 years before you, I was born. So
yeah.
How I've managed to keep my hair in your home, well, that's another subject. So I was born 7 years before you, literally, less than a mile from each other.
Yeah.
But we've never met until 2 weeks ago.
No.
We've managed to live completely independent journeys, but we've both been on a similar journey in as much as we both came from the same background. For those of the listeners and viewers who are based across the pond, of which there will be many, just to say that Coventry in England is the equivalent of Detroit in the USA. It was the heart of car manufacturing in Britain, but also manufacturing of various sorts of machining and so on. So it was a factory manufacturing society where, Geoff, you'd agree, you were born into your social class and you were expected to stay there. And
well, that's where a lot of the depression came from, because so
we're talking both being born in the 50s, me at the beginning, you at the end of the 1950s, and going to school literally half a mile. I went to the other school for boys just down the road. You went to the Catholic school, I went to the state school, and between us we were rubbing shoulders without realizing it. But so it was at high school then for you that you acknowledged the existence of depression in your life.
Yeah, I can tell you a really interesting story. I was suffering with depression. I didn't understand it. I just had this overwhelming, my body was filled with anxiety, and I wouldn't have classed it as depression. I wouldn't have known what that was. But I used to go into the chapel in our Catholic school and I used to beg God to take this off me. I used to beg him. And I always felt he didn't take it off me. Then 40 years later, I was invited back to that school to do a talk. And I remember I was doing a lot of talks at the time, and I wasn't quite sure why I was doing them. So I was getting quite a lot of anxiety. Excuse me. So I turned up at this school. I rang up my friend, who was a Christian healer. And I said, listen, I've got this talk. I'm talking to 4 groups of 11-year-olds. I said, but my message tends to be more of an adult message. I don't know what to say to them. Going into this talk, I don't know what to say to them. And he just said, well, what you do is you just turn up. He said, you know what you do. just have that in mind. But when you sit down in the room where you're going to do the talk, before they come in, just ask God to come through. You just say, let the love come through me. Let them hear that. The day before that, this was the massive spiritual thing that happened to me. The day before that, I'd done another talk with a big group of executives. And after the talk, I walked around Colm Abbey. And suddenly, as I was walking around, I felt my dad and my brother behind me. They're dead, but I felt them palpably. Then I felt a trail of angelic influence. I would say I felt angels, whatever that is for you, Dharma protectors, whatever you want to call them. And it was palpable. I felt them all around me in a trail, like a wedding trail. And then as I walked, they surrounded me till I was in the very center of this halo of angels, and I was lifted. I felt like I was literally floating through Colm Abbey. It was the most sublime experience. Anyway, the next day I'm doing this talk. I'm not quite sure why I'm there. Is this where God wants me to be? Is this where my Dharma is leading me? Don't know what to say to these 11-year-olds. I go and do the talk. I couldn't believe it. They were holding the talk in the very chapel that I used to go in and pray and cry every day when I was depressed, when I was 11 and 12.
Oh my.
So I go into the chapel, Colm, and I'm sat there and I thought, oh God, I know this place. He's brought me back here. So I sit there and I close my eyes and I just say, come through me, show me, not even show me how to serve the kids, because that's still too small. Don't show me how to serve me. That's too small. Show me how to serve you. If God is omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent, then I'll talk to him. If I hit him, everything is showered. So I open my eyes and straight in front of me is a child's painting of the Christ, of Jesus. And he has a trail of angels painted behind him. And I'm thinking that it was the exact image that I had the day before. I looked at the second picture. There was pictures all the way around the room by kids. And every picture was the same picture of Christ with the angels in a trail behind him, until eventually, when it come around to the back of me, the angels were in a full circle around him. My image was actually manifest in this room, and the anxiety went. I talked to 4 groups of kids for the whole day. At the beginning of the day, I had like 40 11-year-olds and 2 teachers. By the end of the day, I had 40 11-year-olds, and the back of the room was full of teachers. So over the day, they'd heard whatever was going on here. And obviously, we know it wasn't me. It's what comes through.
So you were speaking to the 11-year-old and everybody in the room.
And the 11-year-old me.
Yeah, exactly.
God was saying to me, you had that depression. You felt like I didn't come for you, but I've sent you out into the world, and you've done the rigor, you've done the research, you've gone out and found out for yourself. And now you can come and say to these kids, this is my story, and what you want to do is possible. It's possible. It's not probable if you don't do the work. You still have to do the work. And so the whole day was filled with love, because I connected to love. I got my small self out of the way. And I had this massive vision, this sign, this miracle. Once I knew why I was there, Colm, there was no anxiety at all.
Okay.
So it's always the purpose we have to look back to, isn't it?
Yeah. So let's loop back to your book, if I may, the Divine CEO, because one of the other serendipitous events that's taking place this month for you and me is that we're both having a book released on exactly the same date by exactly the same publishers, not by any design by us, just in the infinite wisdom of the publishers themselves. John Hunt Publishing, and we're in the imprint O Books, and my book is just to remind everybody, is The Secret of the Alchemist, which you can see the original artwork on the wall behind me, which is the same artwork on the book here. Have you got a cover yet, Geoff? Here, let's have a look at that. Fantastic. Oh, that's gorgeous. Yeah, brilliant.
It's a nice chunky book.
Yeah, well done.
It's got a good feel to it.
Yes, no, absolutely. I've read it. It's amazing. So just in a nutshell,
if I wanted to bring that down to write it on the back of on the back of the emerald tablet, if I wanted to be able to write it on the back of this back of the seed, I would just write love. Yes. That's the reduction. But of course, as he says, as the budding alchemist says in the Alchemy, in the Alchemist, I need all the books to understand what's on the back of the pebble.
Yeah. So here's the thing. If you had to summarize in a few sentences, as difficult as that might be, just the obviously the kernel of your book is about love, as is my book, unconditional love, as I call it. But it's about work as well. And the secret of The Alchemist is that the alchemists had this thing called the great work. And I explain what the great work is and how you can use those theories and principles of the great work to transform, your own life. But in your book, The Divine CEO, you take a slightly different metaphor. Do you want to just briefly mention the approach that you're taking, the whole concept of the divine covenant? What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, in short, the divine covenant is connecting to love, or connecting to God, or connecting to your soul, whatever you want to call it, and recognizing that between the lower soul, the ego, and the higher soul are obscurations, as they would say in Buddhism. So we're just clearing away the clutter so we can get a clear view. We can get a clear connection with our higher soul. That's where the work is. I would refer to as, in Christian theology, they would call it apophatic theology, which just basically means finding God through reduction, or finding the self through reduction. Perhaps we don't know who we are, we don't know who God is, but we know who we're not. I know I don't want to be a jealous man, an angry man. I know I don't want to be a violent man. I know I don't want to be greedy or envious. I absolutely unequivocally know they're not me. So I can start my life by reducing those, and reducing all the things in my life that feed those, the pornographies, the excesses, too much food, too much ambition, too much drink, too much sex, too much violence, all of the excesses. I can start reducing all of those things in my life. And by this act of negation or reduction, I will eventually come to what is constant. So I get rid of the temporal and I find the constant. And the constant is God. And I know that that's a loaded word, but if the word offends people, that's good. We're teaching them if they're offended by that, because that's a good entry point. If a word can offend you, then you've made a conceptualization out of it, and that conceptualization has created a form with an aspect. We can reduce that back to the neutral, beautiful energy that is love. So the whole idea is contracting in order to expand, but also expanding in order to contract. I don't know if I told you this story. I spoke to Uri Geller on the phone once, and I said to him, I was still really searching. I said to him, Uri, how can I improve? He says, Geoff, you need to expand. And then I was speaking to Gandhi in a meditation, and I often spoke to Gandhi. He was one of the guys who really kind of taught this whole idea about control of the self through control of palate. Yep. And I said to him, how can I improve? And he said, Geoff, you need to make yourself small. Both of them were saying the same thing. If we make the ego small, the consciousness expands. If we make the consciousness expand, the ego will shrink, because the body and the mind become inhospitable for any type of shadow.
Yes.
So the work, which, I mean, I love your book because it lays it out so simply and so clearly. The work, the great work, is us. We reduce in order to reveal what is already there. So from my perspective, I have the lower soul, or the ego. People are talking about being woke at the moment. So you wake up and you go, blimey, I'm free. I'm looking out of these eyes. I've got this potential, but actually I'm in a prison. I'm not sovereign over this body. So then the work becomes wanting to go back to the omega point, back to the still center, or to God.
Yep.
And we do that by winning the sovereignty of the body back again. So this is all about, getting control of what we eat and drink. People want to change the world, but they can't control their own waistline. They want to do the magical, but they still struggle with the mundane. They want to take on the Al-Qaeda, but they can't settle an argument in their own front room. So we have to come back to the self. So my book is about finding God through reduction, creating a covenant with God. So breaking the covenants with the world. So it's no longer about me and what I can achieve and what I can do and what I can earn. It's about me going to a divine sat nav who has an overview of my life. I think Richard, his name will come to me. I was just reading something at the moment. I think he called it the overview. Mm-hmm. So we go to the divine sat nav that has an overview of our life arc and of our development, and he'll say, go left, go right, push, yield, move forward, move back, stay where you are. It gives you the exact details of where you need to go with your life and what you need to do. But at that point, you need to be in a place where you have complete control of the physical body, the psychological body, and you've made this connection with the higher body. And at that point, you take direction. You no longer question where you're going, and you work purely off intuition primarily, but then also you're working off visions, off revelations, off coincidences, off serendipities. The stuff me and you talk about. Yeah. So the whole book is about saying we've been talking about this for a long while, and everybody, especially outside of the spiritual world, has an idea that it's all socks and sandals, that it's all hugging trees, and it's a soft option to the hard question of consciousness. And absolutely isn't. That opinion is a house ghost. It's a house ghost that people use to scare themselves off from doing a deeper insight. So this is saying we have a higher potential. There is a reason for us being here. There is a purpose, but you have to get rid of the clutter. This is Aesop's fable about the turtle. Don't try and fly while you still can't walk on the earth. Sure. So it's about saying this is the work you need to do. And it's not, it is for everybody, but not everybody's going to take it on. I always say it's possible, but it's not probable, because most people I know won't want to do the work, but we want to encourage them to do the work.
So let's talk about the work in context just for a second. Just for those of you that are listening, for those of you on YouTube, one of the things that both Geoff and I are talking about is in larger context, the life of transformation. So I just want to, Geoff, fill people in a little bit about what you and I mean by transformation, and also what we mean by the hero's journey, which is a metaphor for the journey of life that is committed to one of the things that you just said, the becoming the true self. So the discovery of the true self. So for me, even though I started my spiritual journey very fortunately at the age of 18, the tender age of 18, when I had exactly the same thoughts that you, that I don't want to be this kind of person who behaves in these ways that I don't like very much. I want to be this kind of person. What I didn't realize was that the person I wanted to be was already the true me.
Yeah.
That I didn't have to stop being me and become somebody else. I just needed to learn to be true to the real me, and to allow God or love or spirit or whatever name we, as you said earlier, whatever name we give to God, to permeate and to embrace and to meet those parts of me. Now, that journey to the finding of the real self is called transformation. And in the ancient teachings of the alchemists, they used to call it transmutation, and they used the metaphor for that inner journey. The metaphor they used was the Alchemy Lab, which is why I named these podcasts the Alchemy Lab. Yeah. So that meant going through several stages, and the goal of the Alchemy Lab, the great work in the chemistry, was to turn the black, sort of despised, worthless substance, which they named lead, into something glittering and extremely valuable, more than anything else, which was the gold of the alchemist's journey. And the gold was also given other names like the philosopher's stone, the philosopher's child, the elixir of life. They had lots of names for it. But in the end of the day, each alchemist and each of us as alchemists in our world today, we have to make some conscious decisions, from choosing to pursue a life of transformation. And when we do that, and this is what I loved when I first read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And those of you who've read my book know that I actually published his book in Australia, and we'll talk about that in another episode. But one of the things I loved when I first read that is that when we make that commitment, when we make the commitment to transform, all the power of the universe, as Paulo says in The Alchemist, all of the power of the universe conspires to make that happen. So we're never, ever going to be doing this alone.
No, it's absolutely true.
Even if you and I had never met, we are going to be connected, and we're connected to everybody else who's also committed to transformation through the collective unconscious. We're all connected by love, and love gave us the desire to transform in the first place. So in the Alchemist, where the boy Santiago has the dream of finding the treasure in the pyramids, the moment he leaves home, the moment he leaves the comfort of his flock of sheep and everything he'd ever known before that made him feel safe, but he still had that burning dream like you had when you were younger, that discontent that bred depression. Santiago has this dream that he has a bigger life out there. There is an even greater treasure that he could be experiencing if he was just prepared to make the commitment and take those steps. So in my book, The Secret of the Alchemist, I walk the reader through the steps. But one of the things that I want to reassure us all when we're even considering being on this journey, and even at your stage and my stage, even now, Geoff, the knowledge I wake up every morning that love, unconditional love, is surrounding me and within me right now, and will continue always to the next life to lead the way that we should follow, and that we do not need to live in fear. So let's talk a bit about fear. I was reading your other book, by the way, everybody. You've got to buy 2 books if you're interested in Geoff. You've got to buy this book as well, called Notes from a Factory Floor, and we'll talk a bit about the factory floor, Geoff, another time maybe. But one of the things I want to just say from that book, one of the takeaways, is that you very much felt that your origins were built around fear, and that you discovered something that you named the pyramid, the fear pyramid, the pyramid of fear. Do you want to talk a bit about, because that was a big breakthrough for you in helping you to initiate the transformation in your life?
Yeah, I recognise that was the first time. I recognised only probably last week, that was the first time I actually started to communicate with my soul. When my ego collapsed, I was telling you I had this depression. I was having them spontaneously or intermittently all my youth. It was probably in my early 20s, I had a very debilitating depression. Same as usual, came in, said I'm going to stay forever, and completely destroyed my life. It was the most damaging time. And I just remember when my ego collapsed and I went to the doctors, it was no good. His answer was in a bottle of pills, just didn't suit me. I went to my friends, they didn't understand it. I spoke to my wife, she was frightened of it. She didn't recognize me. So I'd be waking up at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat and thinking it's going to be a long day. This is a long day. And I just remembered finding this point of inner anger, this rage. It was like a righteous rage where I just thought, I am not having this anymore. That is it. I'm not having this. I'm just not having it. And it was the first time when when my ego collapsed and I kind of reached out for help, this intuition came to sit down and write all my fears down and confront them one at a time so that eventually I would have no fear. This was the idea. So I drew a piece of fear pyramid, and I'd never seen this anywhere. This was just an intuition. Yep. And on each step of the pyramid, I wrote down one of my fears. Least fear at the bottom, worst fear at the top. So at the bottom, it was a fear of spiders.
Okay.
And at the top, it was a fear of violent confrontation. So I systematically started to stand in front of my fears and embrace them, intercourse with them. And of course, when I intercourse with them, some of them disappeared as soon as I approached them, because they rely on ignorance. They rely on you being afraid of them. They feed off the drama of your fear. But the moment I turned into them, I developed a desensitization. That gave me the confidence and the wisdom and the technique to go to the next fear, and of course the energy. So then I went to the next one, the fear of dentists. I went to the dentist, hadn't been for years. I was afraid of all sorts of silly things. I remember going to I'd been that long since I'd been to the dentist. I had to actually fill in the form and, say how long has it been since you've been to the dentist and all the rest of it. And what was your job? I said my job was a buccaneer. So I've stayed with this dentist for a long time, but my fear of dentists disappeared on the first visit. What I started to realize was that the mundane fears were placeholders. Beneath those mundane fears, I started to recognize subtle fears. I was afraid of my wife. I was very afraid of her. I was afraid of any kind of marital conflict. I was afraid of my mother. I was afraid of any kind of change in my life. I was very afraid of success because I didn't know what success was. I had this idea that success to me as an uneducated Coventry kid was, I don't know, writing a hit song that pays your mortgage for the rest of your life, or coming out, or writing a book that gets you a six-figure, 3-book deal and, instant fame. But my brother, my family, my friends, we didn't understand what it was. And I recognized I was afraid of success, and success was asking me questions. What does it mean to you? What do you want to do? It was asking me to do the rigor. I didn't know what would happen if I was suddenly successful. And one day I'm sweeping the floor in the factory, and the next day I'm on television with Richard and Judy, or or Holly and Phil, and which is what happened to me. One day you're just an ordinary guy. The next day you're in the newspapers. You're on the television. So I was afraid of success. I was definitely afraid of change. So I started to put all of these things on this kind of inner pyramid and started to confront those. When I got to the top of the pyramid, I come face to face with my fear of violent confrontation. So I took a job as a nightclub bouncer just to get some desensitization to that fear, to understand it. And of course, the first night I did on the door, I thought, this is a mistake. Coventry, Colm. It was the most violent city in Europe for its size and population.
When we were growing up, it certainly was.
You could start a fight in an empty room. It was that kind of place. Every nightclub had bouncers. Even the hot dog vans had bouncers because people would tip them up. If a police car went into a pub and didn't leave somebody with the car, it would be tipped on its roof by the time they come back out again. It was a volatile city at a volatile time. So I took this job and I was overwhelmed by stress hormones. I was absolutely overwhelmed and decided on the first night, this is not for me. I've done a night. I'm going to tick it off my list and I'm going to go back to my ordinary life. And of course, at the end of the night, in the bardo period of the shift, when everybody sat down and everybody processed the night's experiences, the head doorman, John Anderson, who was like a god to me, said to me, "You're a bit of a greenhorn, but you did well. You stood up, you faced people, you threw somebody out." He said, "You were a bit clumsy, but you got him out." He said, "Why don't you come back and have another go?" And I was so overwhelmed by the validation. I just thought, well, I'll stop for another shift. I'll maybe do a couple of shifts. And I ended up staying there for nearly a decade. And of course, my first book, Watch My Back, was about building that pyramid and those experiences. So I recognized that standing between me and the things I wanted to do was this terror barrier, as my friend Tony calls it, or a line of fear. And I had to break through the stratosphere of that fear, not just break through it, but I had to absorb 99% of it and reprocess it, break it down into its constituent parts, and that would become the bricks and mortar of my new reality. So it wasn't just about eschewing it or reconceptualizing it. It was about actually absorbing it, and that becomes that it gets burnt up in the volition of your new activity.
Yes.
So that's how that was my journey with fear, and that continues, doesn't it? When things happen.
Yes.
You still got to learn that to become impervious to the rush of passions.
Yes, we're starting to run out of time, believe it or not. Gosh, doesn't it fly when
For the first episode.
Okay, to the next episode.
We should talk about your book as well. We should talk.
We will. We can talk about my book in the next episode as well. I've been talking about my book, Geoff. Don't worry. As well. We've been doing that.
I love your book, and it's I was quite shocked by the amount of.
Go ahead.
The amount of coincidences, the amount of similarities, and the moment I read your book, I thought I need to buy this for my children, because this is. I mean, my kids love The Alchemist, but your book brings things out in The Alchemist that I hadn't seen myself. I've probably read The Alchemist 5 times. And your book brought out things that I'd never seen. I loved it. I loved every page of it.
Thank you, Geoff. So for the next episode, the thing I want us to spend a bit more time on, if you feel up to it, is to talk about your relationship with your mother, which you touch on quite intimately in your story from the factory floor, and the fear of her rejection, and how that probably in the end, moving on from the pyramid of fear, became your greatest fear. And I have one of the synchronicity moments in my book as well, is that a lot of the confusion that I had in life growing up around love, what it looked like, and how to get it and how to give it, was shaped by some issues that I had in my upbringing, in particular in relationship to my mother. So that's one of the things we can talk. And then that will lead us on, I think, in this next episode to talk a bit about the inner child, because that's where we started this episode with, when you were talking about your visit back to Cardinal Wiseman's school and the chapel.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, so let's pick back on it. But for now, thanks everybody for watching and for listening. Please come back next week and join us. We'll be picking up the story of 2 ordinary boys living extraordinary lives. And thanks, Geoff, for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been really, really great pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Bye.